It began with a low rumble, something between thunder and a train. Then, in a matter of seconds, the heart of Boston's North End was swallowed by a wave of thick, dark molasses, taller than a man and faster than a racehorse. The date was January 15th, 1919, and what should have been an ordinary winter afternoon became one of the most bizarre and horrifying industrial disasters in American history. The air that day carried a sweet, heavy scent. Locals were used to it. The Purity Distilling Company's massive steel tank at 529 Commercial Street stored over 2 million gallons of molasses, a key ingredient in making industrial alcohol. The tank loomed over the neighborhood, its riveted iron walls streaked with rust and syrup. Children played baseball in the shadow of it. Horses clopped along the cobblestones nearby. Few realized the ticking time bomb it had become. At 12:40 p.m., with no warning, the tank exploded. Witnesses said it sounded like machine gun fire as the rivets shot through the air. Then came the roar, an eruption of 2.3 million gallons of molasses surging outward at nearly 35 miles per hour. The wave was 25 feet high in places. It tore apart the elevated train tracks, splintered buildings, and crushed everything in its path. People ran, but you can't outrun syrup. One survivor, a fireman named George Leahy, later recalled that the wave hit like a wall of water. The force tossed freight cars into the harbor and carried horses and wagons as if they were toys. A truck was flung through the air and wrapped around a lamppost. The molasses swallowed the streets, rising waist-high, chest-high, higher. It filled basements and cellars, trapping people inside. Children walking home from school were caught mid-step. One small boy, 10-year-old Pasquale Tosca, was killed instantly when a piece of debris struck him. Another child, dragged down by the sticky tide, disappeared before his mother's eyes. The stories that emerged were almost too strange to believe. Men, women, horses, even dogs, entombed in sugar. The Boston Police Department's horses were among the first victims. Many officers themselves were thrown from their feet, their revolvers useless against nature's strangest weapon. Firemen from Engine Company 31, stationed nearby, were buried alive when their firehouse collapsed under the pressure. Only a few survived by clawing their way through the syrup, gasping for air. By nightfall, the disaster had claimed 21 lives and injured over 150 more. The bodies were nearly impossible to recover. Some were found days later, preserved in molasses. Horses fared worse. Entire stables were drowned. The cleanup took weeks. Workers used salt water pumped from the harbor and fire hoses to wash the streets. The sweet smell lingered for decades. Old-timers would later swear that on hot summer days, the faint scent of molasses still hung in the air.
The question that haunted everyone was simple. How could this happen? Investigators quickly discovered that the Purity Distilling Company, owned by U.S. Industrial Alcohol, had built the tank in 1915 hastily and cheaply. There were no building permits, no proper inspections, and no safety tests. The steel walls were only half as thick as they should have been, and the seams leaked from the very start. Residents often collected dripping molasses in cups for their kitchens. When one worker complained to his boss that the tank was groaning ominously, the company's response was to paint it brown to hide the leaks. But there was another layer to the story, one tied to the social and political tensions of the time. World War I had just ended. The U.S. government had been buying massive quantities of industrial alcohol made from molasses to produce munitions. With the war over, the demand was falling fast. Prohibition was looming, threatening to outlaw alcohol altogether. U.S. industrial alcohol was desperate to process as much as possible before the new laws took effect. Some historians believe the tank was filled far beyond its safe capacity in a final push to maximize profits. The aftermath was not just physical, It was legal. Survivors and families of the victims filed hundreds of lawsuits, leading to what became one of the first major class action cases in U.S. history. The company blamed anarchists, claiming the explosion was an act of sabotage. Anti-immigrant sentiment was high, and Boston's North End was largely Italian, home to working-class families who had little power or voice. Yet over years of hearings, the evidence piled up against the corporation. An engineer named Arthur Gell, who had overseen the tank's construction, admitted under questioning that he had never tested the tank for strength. He wasn't even an engineer by training. The court concluded that the disaster was caused by sheer negligence. In 1925, the company was ordered to pay over $1 million in damages, an unprecedented sum at the time, equal to about $17 million today. The Great Molasses Flood became a symbol of industrial carelessness and the cost of putting profit before people. It also changed American law. Boston began requiring structural inspections and safety standards for all large tanks and buildings, rules that would influence city codes across the country. And yet, for all its horror, the story of the molasses flood became part of Boston folklore. Locals told and retold it with a kind of grim fascination. In the decades that followed, it was remembered not just as tragedy, but as a parable about arrogance, greed, and the unpredictability of progress. Even now, more than a century later, historians still uncover new details, fragments of legal testimony, old photographs, forgotten news clippings that reveal how ordinary people experienced that surreal day. A woman named Maria D'Estacio, only 8 years old at the time, recalled that she heard a strange splat, splat, splat against the window before the tank burst. She remembered her mother screaming and the world turning brown. The tank itself became a kind of dark monument. It was never rebuilt. The site eventually turned into a city park with a small plaque that reads simply, "On January 15, 1919, a tank of molasses exploded. 21 people were killed." Nothing about the lawsuits or the greed or the sheer absurdity of drowning in syrup. Just the facts, understated, almost surreal, as if even the city could hardly believe it happened. Yet the evidence remains. In 2015, modern engineers used computer modeling to confirm what eyewitnesses had always said. The wave of molasses truly could have moved as fast as 35 miles per hour, with enough force to topple a building. A century later, the science finally caught up with the survivors' memories. When visitors walk through Boston's North End today, past the cafes, bakeries, and narrow brick streets, it's hard to imagine that beneath their feet once ran a river of sugar and death. The city has grown over the scars, but the story endures because it is so human, a blend of wonder and horror, sweetness and tragedy. And perhaps that is why it still haunts us, because it reminds us that history's strangest stories are also warnings that even the most ordinary things, under the wrong pressures, can turn deadly.